Sydney Catholic Schools is proud to present So You Want to Be a Doctor. My name is Jeremy and I'm from Clancy Catholic College. On today's episode, we speak with one of Australia's most innovative and respected surgeons and researchers. A highly skilled plastic and reconstructive surgeon and world-leading burns specialist, she has pioneered research and technology development in burns medicine. She is the co-inventor of the pioneering spray-on skin technique, which is used in emergency departments and burn units worldwide. She is a consultant plastic surgeon at Fiona Stanley Hospital and Perth Children's Hospital, co-founder of the first skin cell laboratory in WA, Winthrop Professor in the School of Surgery at the University of Western Australia, and co-founder of the Fiona Wood Foundation. In recognition of her work, she has received countless awards and accolades, including Australian of the Year, Australian Living Treasure, and most recently, Officer of the Order of Australia.
Please welcome Dr Fiona Wood to the studio. I'm Tony Farley, Executive Director of Sydney Catholic Schools, and with me today is our student co-host Jeremy from Clancy College, West Hoxton. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr Wood. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you about your remarkable career. So let's start with this. What attracted you to burn treatment and burn care specifically?
Well, first of all, hello and thank you for inviting me to come along and have a chat today. And I guess burns, where did it all start? I think when I sort of tumbled back in time, I started med school, I was very focused on surgery. And as I went forward in my early years, I met a young boy whilst I was in plastic surgery who had got a burn injury, and it was London. And we were exploring the secondary reconstruction and how to rebuild somebody after burns is, very much the plastic surgery sort of space. And I started thinking, wow, it would be an awful lot better if this didn't happen in the first place. How could we actually stop this such aggressive scarring? How could we change this trajectory and influence this life going forward? So I guess it really started in about 1985 when I was a little bit into my surgical training and I got sort of swept sideways into the very burns focus.
Now, we hear about the spray-on skin. I hope you're not tired of talking about it. Can you tell us what it is specifically?
Well, it's not skin at all in its entirety, but it is part of the skin. Skin's made up of, I could talk about skin till you all turn to dust. It's really interesting, but it's made of cells and it's made in a framework. So part of those cells, one of the cell populations, replenish itself all the time. It's turning over all the time. And it comes from what we call the dermal epidermal junction. It's a layer between the outside waterproof layer and the inside tough layer. And that is the engine room of skin. And what the spray-on skin cells are harvesting those cells in a kit so that we can take them straight to the bedside and spray them on. So we're spraying the cells on, and they themselves can then interact with the wound and build that framework and restore skin and heal.
Now, the Bali bombings were a pivotal moment in the life of this country, and you found yourself at that moment as a specialist in the medical field, very much in the middle of it. Can you tell us what things were like there, how it all evolved, and your role in helping people move through that?
Well, it's interesting reflecting back because it's over 20 years ago now, and you're quite right. I think we all are kind of changed at that time because it was so profound for everyone. Basically, our story started way before. Well, living in Western Australia, in Perth, the Northwest Shelf is a oil and gas producer. And I was approached in the 90s by Woodside Petroleum with the question, what would happen if there was a major explosion? It's a long way, it's very remote, it's austere. And we worked together to work out how we would treat people with burn injuries in such an environment. From that work, we developed a disaster plan. we reached out to all our colleagues across Australia and New Zealand with what we call ANSBAR, which is our body that brings us all together. And we worked out collectively what we would do if there was a major burns disaster and how we would work together. By January of 2002, we put all our work together and submitted it to the Australian Health Ministers Advisory Council. And the health ministers accepted the work we'd done, believe, yes, this could be something that we need to work on. And in the whole plan was an exercise. How do we practice? How do we kind of make this happen? We never did the practice because what we did was for real in October of that year of 2002. And I've always felt it's a great privilege to be able to do what you're trained to do for so many people and to influence the situation for the better. I mean, we can't necessarily influence the fact that it happened, but we can influence the aftermath and we can influence how things move forwards from there. And certainly it was a position where, not just in Western Australia, it was all over Australia where people, the burns teams, were stepping up and actually looking after people and making sure that they did their best to get those very unfortunate individuals back into life and to move on.
Dr. Wood, one of the things about medical research is that there's huge competition for grants and funding out there. In 1999, you created the Fiona Wood Foundation. What prompted you to do that?
Well, that was, it sort of started with the McComb Foundation, and it wasn't the Fiona Wood Foundation a little bit later. The McComb Foundation was named after Harold McComb, who was my great mentor, and it became apparent that we needed to support ourselves. We needed to roll our sleeves up and reach our community and ask for help. And so we built a not-for-profit entity that was just that. It became the Fiona Wood Foundation later as my colleagues changed the name, which was like kind of a bit awkward, but anyway, here and there. And so we were in a position where we could, for example, I assigned the intellectual property of the ReCell kit, of the kit that develops the spray-on skin cells. I assign my intellectual property to the foundation. So the royalties from that go to the foundation and support our research. Other things that we've done, whether we go to the boot scooters and to speak, or whether we go to our corporate colleagues, or in fact things like we've written books and things, all the royalties go through to the foundation. And that really has been pivotal in keeping us going. Competitive grants are just that. Yeah. They're competitive. And you get some, you don't get some. But to be able to keep going in the lean times is profoundly important, because we've been able to keep together our team for a long time now, and that's been absolutely instrumental in keeping our research going and our inquiry going, and really building a network, not just locally but across the world, that can help of people that are exploring things in a similar way and different. That matters as well. So no, it's been a huge positive to our work over the years.
One of the interesting parts of the situation you find yourself in, and the Fiona Wood Foundation, and you describe that as being awkward, but part of your job, including, and I hope you did do some boot scooting. Have you?
I remember that day. My kids were little. It was the weekend, and we were in a field, and I had one of them on a backpack. So we collectively boot scooted, much to their displeasure, I'd have to say. But yes, we did.
Oh, they've brought up boot scooting. That's beautiful. But part of the role is...
You only could pull that off once.
You'll be jiving next time. It'll be not a problem. But part of the point being, you're a scientist, a clinician, a researcher, a surgeon. All of that work sits there, and then you're also out there being the face of it as well. It's a job that is very forward and front of house. And how do you balance that? Because you're doing the intense work, the clinical work, and then you're finding yourself in a situation where you're in fact out there as the face of a whole area and specialty.
I'd have to say, of all the things that I do, that is the most a little uncomfortable, to be honest. I mean, like this morning, we're talking about my journey and things, and that's always a little bit uncomfortable for me because I understand that it's important to share and to support and to inspire kids as well, particularly. And I'm clearly a kid fanatic. I have 6 kids and 6 grandkids now. So that's such an important thing. And to connect with our community, we would not have been able to do what we've done without connecting to our community. But if you ask me to speak about our work in a scientific context, then that's much more comfortable because it's not personal. But it would be curlish, it would be of me to go, well, I'm not doing it. Because I recognize the value and of actually been integrated into our community, and actually discussing how we can make it better, not just in burns, but just across the board for all of us. How can we actually all work out how to bring our A game to the table?
Yeah.
And so so these things matter.
Let's just talk a bit. 6 children, 6 grandchildren. How have you managed all of this?
That's hard to remember. It's a bit frantic, but it's just good fun. I think I've been very fortunate. My kids, are a great crew. Well, they're adults now, but I'm very glad you're not asking them that question. They'll be telling you all the tales. But we did extend the school day. They did sport before and after school each day so that myself and my husband could work because he's a surgeon as well. And we sort of juggled things as you do the best you can at the time, So, and now it's great to be able to hold the grandkids and to take them. I dropped 3 of them to the same school my kids went to. It's fascinating to see the people who are still there all those years later, and great too.
I'm sure they'd say wonderful things about you. Just before we go to, and it's going to be the lightning round, which is going to be very intense, where's the technology going in your field? What's happening at the moment, and what are the sort of breakthroughs you think are in the near future?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question because from a burns perspective, there's opportunity to improve all the way along the journey. We've been active all the way along that journey, from teaching people first aid. Prevention is better than cure. That is for absolute certain. And then how do we treat people in the pre-hospital setting, in the hospital, and then on to full rehabilitation. So it's a bit like Sky Cycle Team, incremental gains along the way. But then I guess the sense you're asking them, but what's going to be the big jump forward? And I think that is hard because we're all beavering away looking at how we can understand regeneration. How can we heal without scarring? Where is the cues from that? Geckos can grow a tail, but why can't we, And understanding how the cells can migrate, and connect in the wound and then produce new skin. That is fundamentally important, absolutely. And we're engaging with our colleagues in 3D printing, biomaterials, and a whole range of things. But also we see that once you lose that part of your skin, it changes the rest of you. You have changes in your immune system because of the inflammation and the pain. And how can we get those back? So we've got 2 issues here. One is the skin and the area that goes on to scar or not. And certainly we're getting more of the or nots as we go forward. But also, how does it affect the whole of the person? And learning what's happening in that whole of that person means we can start developing novel therapies and driving forward to this regeneration. We all kind of self-organize every day. We go from a small, single, there's the embryo, to someone that's recognizable through life. How do we keep that going? And how do we overcome these injuries? Important.
And in overcoming them, we're talking about the sort of physiological, but one of the things in terms of what you're saying, it brings to mind what's going on psychologically for a person who's had a really profound, visually obvious burn, for example, that changes their appearance forever. How do you work through those issues, and with whom do you work with a patient who's in this situation and the journey of my life has changed by virtue of my appearance, amongst other things?
I think it's a really interesting point you make, because sometimes people recover in ways that is breathtaking. And so we work in a multidisciplinary team. We have psychology, psychiatry, all social work, all bedded with us, our occupational therapists, our physios, nurses, dietitians, and the list goes on. And so we're all working to do the best for our patient. But of course, they've got their network and the people that love them and they're around them as well. And so trying to build that network of support is really important. We say our vision is scarless healing inside and out. And that's where our starting point is, and recognizing that every point along that journey is an opportunity to reduce the suffering and pain and improve the outcome. For example, one of our nurses did her PhD as a mature age in post-traumatic growth. What makes some people take on what is unimaginable trauma and come back stronger? Now, if we can unpick that and understand that, then we can help those who don't. So we're very active in that space as well, and we've got great team members that support us in that space.
It's quite genuinely inspiring. Now, Dr. Wood, I'm hoping you can brace yourself for what is going to be the lightning round. Our student co-host Jeremy will be firing off rapid-fire questions, and the goal is to answer as many as you possibly can within a 60-second time limit. Dr. Wood, are you up for the challenge?
All right. Each one for 60 seconds?
No. This is going to be 60 seconds and that's it.
All right, here we go.
So, Jeremy, let's dive in.
Okay. First question, what did you want to be in primary school?
Astronaut.
Wonderful. What was your first job?
Butcher boy, knocking on doors for people to come to the butcher van.
Interesting. One thing you can't start your morning without?
Coffee.
Fair. Last thing
and
you Googled?
And the ocean.
Oh, okay. Last thing you Googled?
Kate Poole, a scientist here in Sydney, and she's figured out with her team how cells can feel. So that's so exciting.
That's very apt. What's your favourite book?
Elidor. Read it when I was a kid. It's an interesting read.
Okay. What's your favourite meal?
Curry.
Describe yourself in 3 words.
Crazy, energetic, passionate.
Yeah, I'm getting that. Dog or cat person?
No.
Neither.
I'm a kid person.
Okay. Evidently. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
To work harder.
You already have that superpower.
Oh no, there's so much to do.
And I have one last question. It's kind of a stupid question because I feel like it's already what you've achieved, but what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, because failure is part of the whole deal. How can we think ourselves whole? Wow. How can we stimulate the brain to... Yeah, that's where I go. Yeah.
Okay. Taking a very philosophical turn. Okay. Wonderful. I don't think we made it all the way, but that's fair because you're very into those questions.
You were great, Fiona. You were great. And you were great too, Jeremy.
Oh, thank you.
You're tough.
Okay. So now it's my turn to ask some questions, so prepare yourself. So you mentioned that prevention is more important than cure. So obviously spray on skin and the kind of thing you've specialised in is focused on the cure. So what do you do in terms of prevention specifically?
Well, I mentioned the Australian New Zealand Association, and as a collective we have a big focus on prevention. I think that has started decades and decades ago. People looking at bringing things together like legislation and education of people, for example, when I was a youngster in burns from the front of the body, from nightwear of children next to open fires was very common. So there was legislation changing the fabric that the nightwear was made in. There was, education around fire guards, etc. Kettles had curly flexes had flexes that hung down. The first thing was curly flexes, so they didn't hang down, so a child could pull on it. And now you have the base plate on kettles. The design of things is to get safer, yeah? So it's a combination of legislation, education, bringing an awareness, so that you know that if you go to KidSafe, which is a great thing to Google, you'll see all sorts of things on there, starting with awareness and understanding, turning the hand handles to the back so that kids can't grab them, for example. Simple things, as well as then let's look at the temperature that the water comes out of the tap, and can we have thermostats on there so that we don't have a scalding water coming out of taps. So I could go on, but I think you get the idea. And then we go into schools, and we have books called Ben and Bella, superhero books, and the Ben and Bella superhero books teach kids about, where the dangers are and how to, if you do get burnt, how to do burns first aid.
Okay. So it sounds like you are doing a lot. But one thing I want to ask about that is, you mentioned awareness, right? Do you think the public is aware enough about the dangers of like burns and this sort of field that you've specialized in? And if not, what would you want them to know that the public doesn't know already?
I think there is a movement across in our space in Australia and New Zealand that is really building and gathering ground, because we spend a lot of time on burns first aid. Clean, cool running water between 15 and 18 degrees for 20 minutes within the first 3 hours of injury will influence the scar you've worn for life. We've published this, we've researched it. Great research come out of Queensland and New South Wales, etc. So how do we get that message out? And I think, I remember after Bali speaking to the health minister at the time and saying that I think by 2010, we should have a population, 50% of whom actually understand not just burns first aid, but things like start the heart, secure the airway, stop the bleeding, and call the burn, right? 4 basic first aid messages. And why don't we target year 10? When people are coming to start learning to drive, we give, we said, our kids can drive cars, but what about a first aid course? That's not a bad idea. And so if there's something that should happen, for example, in motor vehicle accidents, people often don't survive because they just can't breathe. Just tip the chin. Chin thrust. Open the airway. Does it work every time? No. Will it work sometimes? Yes. Can it save a life? Potentially. I've given out first aid awards for example, a group of year 12s when one of them just had a sudden cardiac arrest and dropped dead in front of them on the beach in Rottnest Island at Levers. They resuscitated him, and he had an undiagnosed heart block. And he survived because his friends had been to surf club and knew what to do. These things matter. And so I think we've got to approach these things at every level. We can't just say to the government, oh, you do this and stand back. We go into schools, we go into sports areas, we link with people who deliver first aid, and so on it goes. I would love for the government to say, right, let's see how we can link this in some way with a milestone like your driving license or whatever it is. But I think we've got a lot of work to do, and we have to do it. As I say, you can't just say, oh, this should be done, and then stand back with your arms folded and say, but it's your responsibility. It's responsibility for all of us together.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to sort of roll back a little bit and ask about you as an individual. So you've mentioned before in like another talk you've done that you had that like click moment where you were like, yes, I want to be a surgeon. This is what I want to do with my life. But a bit before that, I want to start, where was the moment where you sort of first had the idea of going into medicine in general?
I think I was going to go. I was in school. I skipped a year. I was sort of, trotting along, thinking everything was fine and dandy, and I was going to go to Cambridge and do maths and physics. And I was kind of under a bit of pressure from my elder brother, who was already at medical school, and my mum, who figured that being a doctor was something that was much better for a female, that I would always have a capacity to work. And she was very focused on that as a female at that time, having a job that was of equivalence, if you like, was important to her. So I was kind of under a bit of pressure. And I went with my two older brothers to London for the weekend. And we went to the med school. And we had a really great weekend. And it was the weekend before I put in my university entrance form, and they got me. And so instead of going down the sort of Oxbridge entry into pure science, I put down medicine. And so it was, well, yeah. And I think I was also had my eyes open a bit that weekend into all the different kinds of people doing medicine for different reasons too. And I thought, well, I can always do nuclear physics in medicine. I can always, you need to bring those skills and make them useful. And so science and research has been part of my DNA, I guess. But then the outlet for it became medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been able to apply that obviously very well and have a great impact. And so going further into that, so what about those skills? What do you think makes you in particular so skillful in terms of being a doctor, being a surgeon, those particular attributes you have that make you skilled in science and research, and also managing that workload in terms of your kids and stuff?
No, that's a really hard question, isn't it? Because what makes me skillful? I think any skill requires hard work. I think you can have an aptitude for it, and certainly that helps. I mean, if you look at a rugby team, you've got the scrum half who's not as big as the prop, yeah? Because there's a sort of a certain body shape that's appropriate to those positions. And so there are certain people that are appropriate to certain things, yeah? But it's not exclusive, and I certainly believe in being inclusive. And so I think you've got certain character traits, I guess. And I think what underpins that for me is curiosity. I'm really curious, and I'm kind of driven. And so you put those two things together, you can't make progress without hard work. And so what makes anyone skillful is hard work, whether it be the scrum half, the prop, or the Olympic runner. It's hard work, yeah. And so then you've got your curiosity, and you've got your drive, you've got your hard work. And then there's another thing that comes in there, and that's called resilience. And we talk about a lot these days. And, you get knocked, and you get knocked, and you get knocked, and you can think, oh, okay, that's enough. Or you can go, okay, right, let's work this out. Let's figure out these hurdles. Let's either jump over them, knock them down, or go around them. But you can't walk away. And are we in surgery? Are we selected because you can't walk away? Yeah, because you can't leave halfway. And so, is that a sort of a learned behaviour, or a selected kind of personality trait, or a bit of both, I guess? So, I don't think people sort of come skilled. I think you just got to work at it, and it's got to be worth it for you too. For your passion, your curiosity, or whatever it may be. Hard work, the hard falls away from the work if you're in a space that is interesting and making progress. And yeah, sure, it's hard some days, but it's worth keeping going because of the changes you're making around you or to the people around you, etc. So that's a really complicated question.
Well, I have another complicated one for you, or at least I think it's complicated. I don't know. So when you were developing spray-on skin for the first time, what I want to understand was what that process was like for you. Like when you sort of started your research and development, like were you going in with the intention of sort of making or developing this innovation, or were you going, I want to see change in sort of whatever way I can, and the research led you to realize you could develop something, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I think innovation we talk about a lot these days as well. But I think, and you've got a goal, and we've got to have vision and all that sort of stuff. I understand that. But basically, I was really interested in the fact that lots of other, like geckos, etc., don't scar. So that's where it started. Why do we scar so aggressively? I want to know about that. I want to find out what the difference is. At what point on the evolutionary scale do we lose that capacity, and why? And so I started thinking about that and reading everything around. And me running parallel to that, I was seeing people whose skin was damaged, and sometimes beyond survival. And I was reading and heard that in Boston in 1982, they used the first cultured epithelial autograft. That means what they did was take a bit of skin from a non-burnt area and grew it into a skin sheet, and then lifted that skin sheet off the plastic tissue culture flask and put it on a person in Massachusetts General Hospital. Fascinating, right? Wow, because they could expand the areas of cover. So instead of being restricted by our traditional techniques of donor sites, we could expand that. So that started it for me. And I was tracking the literature, understanding what was going on. I was a junior surgeon in training. And when I got to Perth, again, going through training, still read it, because in those days it took 3 months to get the journal articles because it was before the internet. And so we were tracking what was going on in the world, and I heard a radio station where Joanne Padlanetsky was a scientist in Melbourne. She'd been to Boston, and she and her professor in Burns, Professor Masterton, had set up a laboratory in Monash to grow skin. It was of 1990, and it was just blew me away. So long story short, that's where the first skin went from Perth to Melbourne, and 3 weeks later came back in a sheet. Now, and we worked together for a couple of years, and I thought, we've got to be able to do this better. Time to healing is profoundly important. Every day in the burns unit is a day too long. And so that was the platform when we started. So what I was driving, what I was hungry for, was to reduce the time to healing, to get this whole process done faster. And so I met Marie Stoner, who's in the bone marrow laboratory. We got a medical scientist. So we got our heads together and we thought, right, let's work out how to do this faster. What are the fast bits? What are the slow bits? What's in the literature? How can we put everything that's known together? And we went from 3 weeks to 10 days. And then we started thinking, well, why are we doing sheets? Why can't we put this on as a suspension, as a spray? My goodness. So then we went 5 days, and then we're spraying cells on. First time we sprayed cells was 94, 95. It's a long time ago. And then we thought, well, why can't the body be the tissue culture environment? Why can't we spray the cells directly onto the wound if we prepare it well enough? And if we do that, we need to harvest the cells. And so that therefore came the kit. So Marie and I didn't start, we will build the kit to harvest skin cells. What we started with was we need to do better. We need to close down the time to healing. We need to improve what we do so that people suffer less. So that was the drive and the incremental way forward.
Yeah, I see. So the drive was like the desire to build on something that came before. Interesting. Okay. I'm jumping around a bit, but now I want to ask about your uni experience in England. So was your uni experience traditional? Like, because obviously your career is quite non-traditional, but would you say, how would you compare that to your uni experience with medicine?
I went to St Thomas's Hospital Medical School. It was on the St Thomas's is on the River Thames, opposite the Houses of Parliament. It was a very conservative med school. It was a traditional course. Initially, I was in the year of 60 some, but then I did after 2 years of basic preclinical work studies, I did a BMed Sci. So I stepped sideways for a year, and I explored anthropology and neuroanatomy. So that was a little bit unusual. The professor of anatomy at the time would take people on field trips to East Africa to work with the leakies, and I was chosen to do that. So that was again cool. And so that year of my 6 years was a little sort of a step sideways into sort of exploring what is a little bit more, I guess, unusual. Yeah, it wasn't mainstream. Then I came back into the last 3 years mainstream, and that's when things started, I guess, to change, because coming out of medical school at that time in 1981 and saying you wanted to be a surgeon as a female was branded unusual from the word go. And so I had to then work out how to navigate this quite austere environment. And my natural inclination was to research and to inquiry. And I knew my CV had to be such that it couldn't be ignored. And I kind of got that in med school. So as in addition to going to East Africa, I'd done field trips in India and the Far East and things. And so done research, particularly research in India on nutrition in pregnancy was something that was different. And I organized all the funding for it and the whole protocols and things. And so I guess as I came through that system that was very traditional, I kind of started marking myself as someone who was a little different, not just because I was a female from Yorkshire, but because I had a capacity to not just ask a question, but drive through the research process and answer it. And so then I had to I think that meant I had, even as a student, a CV that was a little bit unusual and therefore warranted attention. And so I got to the interview stage and get me in the room. get me in the room. And I'll show you, I can do this. So it was a mixture of both, I think, a very traditional medical training, but with a realization that I was not competitive as a traditional med student.
Yeah, that alternative aspect or uniqueness was where you shone. Absolutely. So I've been asking you a lot of questions, so I'll give you a bit of relief by asking just one more. What do you think is perhaps the proudest moment of your career?
It's hard because I've been really fortunate, and there's so many things that I can say, both on a professional and personal level. Yeah. I mean, I've been in an environment singing, Advanced Australia Fair when my youngest won the World Championship, Junior World Championship trampolining. Yeah, that was pretty special and that sort of stuff. So there's those, there's sort of those personal things. And in a professional space, the first thing that came into my mind was a patient who I met in 1992 who had in excess of 90% body surface area burn and survived and has gone on to do incredible things. And that was one of my most challenging times. I almost stopped at that point because despite healing very rapidly from October to December the 16th, that's how in 1992, that's how it's burnt into my brain. He got a very severe complication. After his skin was healed, his nerves were affected and inflammation of the nerves, and they couldn't move. and it took 9 months for things to recover to the point of being able to go home. And so his nerves had to grow back. But my goodness, the day he went home, that was very special. He was a deputy head at a high school at the last count, and then went and did missionary work in New Guinea. At the time of his burn as a 29-year-old, he was a science teacher and helping his friend in the school holidays on a roofing contracting. So, yeah, and he was a big Aussie rules player. So that's an example, I guess, of someone who survived against the odds to do amazing things. And my life and his are connected in a way that is unique. And yeah, I'm very fortunate because there's been many of those moments. But that was the first one that came into my mind when you asked me the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that really shows your prowess and your commitment to being a doctor is that when I asked you for the proudest moment, your mind immediately jumped to talking about a patient instead of an award or a recognized achievement. And I think that says a lot. Anyway, I will give you some relief from my interrogation and hand back over to Tony.
I was thinking of, but when you've just said that, my apologies to interrupt you, was when I was an Australian of the Year in 2005, and I was in front of 30,000 people on the podium. It was very special and all, but every time the clapping started slowing down, there were 6 little monsters at the side started it up again, and it went on for ages. And I'm standing there trying to give them the evil eye to get them to stop. And it went on forever. And they thought it was very funny.
They love you. They love you.
It's so awkward.
Great questions and great answers. Dr. Wood, just finally, just 2 things. And one is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
That takes me straight back to my dad. Yeah, and the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
You can't let it all go to luck.
Yeah, or talent for that matter. Talent's got to be developed. Well, then the second thing is, and this is specifically for medical practitioners, aspiring or current medical practitioners, what sort of advice would you give them?
I think it's a really interesting time that we live in, and then there's information everywhere. Transferring that information into knowledge and then into experience, that experience that can influence the suffering of another is a really challenging journey. But what I'd say is, my goodness, it's worth it. So stick with it.
Beautiful. Simple, beautiful advice. Dr. Wood, thank you so much for joining us today. You are astonishing and amazing and very inspiring.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much indeed for asking me.
Make sure to check out Sydney Catholic School's social media channels and see if you can guess our guest for our next episode.
To find more about the opportunities Sydney Catholic Schools provides in STEM, visit our website www.sydcatholicschools.newsouthwales.edu.au or drop us a line via our social media channels. God bless.